Hey everyone, just wanted to provide some much needed context if you haven't already heard us talk about it on the podcast before jumping into this. I sat down for an interview with John Bogden, the former commander of Guantanamo Bay. You'll soon hear he's held many other positions, including the Director of Safety and Security at my college campus. Me, Greg, and Chandran have been outspoken about his hire for the past 5 years, and this June he is retiring. This was my only chance to sit down for a candid conversation with someone genuinely accused of being a war criminal mass torturer. Let's start from the beginning for a moment. At the end of the Spanish-American Civil War, the United States capitalized on the Cuban-American Treaty of Relations to push for a colonial effort to establish military bases on Cuba under the assumption that Cuba would one day be a colony of the United States. The Cuban Revolution had other plans, and the government of Cuba has considered the U.S. military occupation of Guantanamo Bay to be illegal since 1959. Despite this, our naval base has remained in place for 65 years, becoming particularly infamous during the United States' War on Terror. In 2006, after failing to thwart Freedom of Information requests, the U.S. military officially acknowledged holding 779 prisoners in the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base's detainment camp. These prisoners were largely Afghani and Pakistani men accused of being terrorists by the U.S. military. The vast majority of detainees in Guantanamo Bay, however, 86%, were not captured by U.S. forces. Instead, the government filled the prison with people they bought for bounties. The U.S. military flew planes over parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan, offering $5,000 for any suspicious person. This amounted to approximately 7 years' average salary for most people in the area, encouraging them to turn over innocent men in exchange for a life-changing amount of money. Needless to say, the military did not conduct investigations, but just detained those accused in exchange for money. Since then, it has turned out that they got it wrong most of the time. It didn't even take long for those in charge to see their mistake. As early as 2002, Guantanamo's operational commander complained that he was being sent too many, quote, Mickey Mouse detainees. Detainees at Guantanamo Bay were reported to be tortured ruthlessly using tactics such as waterboarding and religious humiliation under the protection of President George W. Bush's claim that these prisoners were not entitled to any protections under the Geneva Conventions or U.S. law, being on Cuban soil instead. Despite President Obama campaigning on shutting down Guantanamo Bay in 2008, 21 years after the opening of an offshore detention facility specifically designed to evade the rule of law, the U.S. government continues to detain 35 men inside the Guantanamo Bay detention camp. Of these 35 men, most have never even been charged with a crime, and none has had a fair trial. In June of 2012, a man named Colonel John Bogden took over as commander of the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center, also known as Gitmo, but you might know it by the waterboarding that happens there. Within weeks of Bogden taking charge, new violations of international law in relations to prisoners' rights were widely reported alongside a violent crackdown on detainees, most of whom were held without trial under no charges whatsoever, and only some of whom were released to this day. Protests began when Bogden began orders to seize the Quran from prisoners and desecrate it, in their eyes, leading to hunger strikes that resulted in torture, force feeding via tubes, isolation, sleep deprivation, and even shooting people with rubber bullets. When international human rights lawyers were called in to defend the detainees, hidden cameras and microphones disguised as smoke detectors were used to illegally spy on confidential client-attorney conversations. This is a violation of international law in and of itself. When he was tried by a military tribunal for this, Bogden not only admitted to this, but additionally admitted to running clandestine detainment sites in Iraq and Somalia. His legal defense stated that he, as the warden of the prison, could not have reasonably known that these devices were being used to spy on detainees. The trial also revealed that Bogden had recently ordered the wiring of the bugs to be repaired to full working order, but, to no avail. The military tribunal let him off without punishment. A study by Seton Hall University's Center for Policy and Research came to the conclusion that Bogden's testimony was inconsistent about what he knew and when he knew it. In January of 2019, John Bogden was hired for his first civilian job as the Associate Vice Chancellor and Head of Safety and Security for UNC Charlotte, straight from the military to my campus. The Chief of Campus Police reports directly to him. When the students confronted the Chancellor about this in 2019, a fact set was released by UNC Charlotte defending the practices of Guantanamo Bay. They later went on to speak of Bogden's high character and his honorable service in the military. It is my hope that through listening to John Bogden in his own words, you may begin to understand how this happened. The results of this interview are, in a word, banal. There's no smoking gun in here. For me, it's interesting that he admitted again to running POW camps in Iraq and Somalia, whose existence is neither confirmed nor denied by the American military, among some other things that people more well-read on the subjects may find significant. But nobody thinks they're a war criminal. John Bogden believes the war on terror will continue forever, as far as he's concerned. He believes he was correct in his actions because he was doing his non-negotiable duty, and he does not retrospect on the morality of this. He's fully bought in. He considers everyone who he ever held as a prisoner of war to be undeserving of a trial on the grounds that they were classified as enemy combatants. He didn't seem interested in how they became classified as such. He doesn't need to be liked by the public because he's unaccountable to the public. The prestige gained and connections made during his time in the military were enough to reproduce that power in the civilian sphere and provide him a cushioned fall at a public university, laundering his image and paying him well enough to retire peacefully after 5 years. Bogden takes credit for U.S. anti-terrorism policy proudly on his resume, but in person he refuses to take responsibility for the decisions made, suggesting he was merely one person who had input. When power is wielded in hegemony, responsibility is shared by everyone, and thus accountability is possible for no one. How can you hold any one person accountable when there are so many cogs in this machine, always someone else's orders to follow? In Bogden's office, there's a campus protest flyer calling for his immediate removal, framed and hung, ironically, next to a photograph of smiling, posing soldiers in front of a prison wall. During his interview with 60 Minutes, when confronted with the human rights abuses that took place under his leadership, Bogden said the following, quote, "I changed the rules. You get attention where you get attention. I'm not worried about my critics, and I don't intend to defend everything." In the eyes of the law, John Bogden has done nothing wrong. In the eyes of U.S. hegemony, his actions at Guantanamo Bay were par for the course. There is no liberal institution to hold him accountable because he is carrying out the will of these institutions. When you are listening to this conversation, gauge your reaction to John Bogden's candor and ask yourself, are your interests being represented by this country? I would like to leave you with a poem written by Joma Aldasari, one of the detainees tortured during John Bogden's tenure at Guantanamo Bay, who attempted suicide twice under his watch. Take my blood. Take my death shroud and the remnants of my body. Take photographs of my corpse at the grave lonely. Send them to the world, to the judges, and to the people of conscience. Send them to the principled men and the fair-minded. Let them bear the guilty burden before the world of this innocent soul. Let them bear the burden before their children and before history of this wasted, sinless soul, of the soul which has suffered at the hands of the protectors of peace. Oh, hey, there you are.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
Bogden.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Have a seat.
All right, yeah.
Mind if I close the door?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so I'll just get right into the questions, if it'll pull up. Okay. So, first, to start out, you're free to push back on this perception, but it seems that, Sharon Gaber's tenure as chancellor has caused a bit of, upheaval on the administrative side of UNC Charlotte, and this could obviously just be due to timing, but I was told by a separate interview that sometimes when new chancellors take over, there's usually a lot of different administrative changes. So do you see, basically what I'm getting at is, do you see your retirement as related to a changing leadership philosophy, or was this completely unrelated decision?
No, I mean it's not related to, certainly not related to Chancellor Gaber or anything like that. I mean, my time here has been great. I mean, it's been without a doubt everything we do in this field is challenging. So for starters, do you understand what all the parts of what I'm responsible for are?
Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Okay, so let's start there and kind of walk into it. We'll kind of go outside in a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. So the Safety and Security Department's responsible for law enforcement, public safety, environmental health and safety, which are things as far-reaching as radiation and laboratory safety, to water safety, to life and fire safety, pretty much anything in the gamut of safety that we do, a lot in the environmental world, and a lot of it has to do with regulatory compliance with things like OSHA and FEMA and EPA regulations, that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also run the Emergency Operations Center and Emergency Management Directorate, which is response to just that, anything that's an emergency that can come in things more familiar like floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, snowstorms, things that are, we're sort of a little more accustomed to, or more exigent things like a pandemic, like a shooting, things like that.
Yeah.
So, and then of course, threat management, threat assessment, business continuity, and then I guess a smaller component of that is security technology. But that's everything that I'm responsible for here. Those are all very, vital roles to keeping the university and the community safe and allowing people to just live their lives without having to think about, are we at risk or are we prepared for things? And hopefully if our job's done well, then it's relatively seamless from that respect. After my military career, getting in here it ended up being a great opportunity with a tremendous team of professionals. Really loved working for the folks that I worked with here. But at the end of the day, I've got 4 years of government service. I've been working quite a long time. I'm at the point in my life where I'm ready to actually retire. Mm-hmm. I have a grandson just born in the last year, and my wife and I are moving home, which is, kind of a hard thing to say when you spend almost 40 years of your life relatively nomadic.
Yeah.
So those are really my reasons for deciding to leave.
Okay.
The time was right. It's time to pass the reins on and let somebody else run the ship.
Yeah. So, on that note, going a bit further into like your job responsibilities. So I wanted to ask, since UNC Charlotte has undergone quite a few challenges while you've been here, I'd say pretty extraordinary amount of challenges for the 5-year period. But so just going through it chronologically, what would you say your role in the response to the April 2019 shooting was?
I was responsible for supervision of the entire response to the event, from the actual tactical scenario of the police responding to the recovery of the scene to the management of notification and lockdown and eventual clearing and unlocking of the university, all the communications that the comms group, the crisis communications that went out, all flowed through us. And then, of course, we went into what we consider a recovery period, which lasted about 9 months, that went through a very deliberate assessment of what worked well, what can we improve. Anytime there's any sort of an event, you always have what we call an after-action review, where you look at those two things. What did we do? What worked well? What things do we need to keep doing, reinforce? What could we do better? What could we improve? And based on that, and one of the things we did was we hired an external agency to come out and do exactly the same thing. Look at us in the same fashion, because for something that's sort of that magnitude, an internal look is good, but it's good to get a disinterested third party to take a look at it and say, this is our assessment of how you did things, what you can improve. Yeah. Based on their assessment, based on our internal assessment, which remarkably were, or maybe not unremarkably, but we're relatively similar. There was a handful of things that we identified that they didn't, and vice versa. But we use that as a template then to start outlining security improvements and overall sort of crisis response improvements. Mm-hmm. And we spent about 9 months getting programs in place to start changing and advancing those areas. We didn't necessarily fix them all in 9 months, because some of them are multi-year sort of events. A good example right now is the classroom lockdown conversion we're doing. Something that we wanted to do coming out of that was convert all the classroom and laboratory locks to electronic locks. We have an electronic access control system that generally governs the external of all the buildings on campus. there's a lot of areas, like if you noticed when you came in here, there was access control coming through and they had to swipe through. There's a lot of pockets and areas on campus that have different levels of access, but all the external buildings are controlled. So we have a button we can push in the dispatch in an emergency scenario that is, we call it the lockdown button. It's not overly genius words. But the idea is it does just that. With the push of a button, it locks every exterior door on campus. Mm-hmm. Ideally, we would like to get that to every exterior door and every classroom and laboratory. It would be great to get it for just campus-wide, but the reality is the majority of non-classroom laboratory spaces are just like that. They have some kind of a lock on the door because they're an office space. Mm-hmm. And offices and workspaces all come with locks. So it's nice to be able to quickly engage that, sort of automatically. But really that's been the focus. So that was a big effort that we started and then got rapidly sidetracked right at the end of the recovery period by COVID. We spent about 2 years pouring every bit of energy and time we had into the COVID response. And then about a year ago, we started getting back into what it was going to take, started appropriating funds and doing contractor searches to start. And we've got a 3-phase program to convert, and we're about somewhere in the 50 to 60% way through phase 2, and we hope to have phase 3 completed by the end of the calendar year. So while I won't see it come to fruition while I'm here, I at least saw it get started and get moving. And that's just an example of one of the kind of significant efforts we put into place, following to try and make things better and you're not ever really going to stop something like an active shooter. Yeah. What you want to be able to do is as quickly as possible mitigate the amount of success that the perpetrator can achieve. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. If the second he walks in somewhere, pulls a weapon, starts to do anything, I can hit a button and lock every door around him. While that isn't great for the space he's in immediately, right? Yeah. But he can't continue to prosecute after that. Right. And that's so. I would love something that was the all-seeing eye that could see somebody come on campus with a gun in their pocket, stop them beforehand. But we're nowhere near that. Yeah.
And it's to my understanding that there was also like a big overhaul in the security camera system anyway as well, right? Yeah,
it wasn't not as much an overhaul, but an assessment of where we had cameras, what areas were, what we would call a dead spot, right? Areas that we don't have good coverage that we should. Common, all the common spaces, right? And that's not just from the shooting, that's just from sort of a general security perspective, right? Yeah. When you're moving around in any large public space, there's pretty much an expectation nowadays that there's going to be some level of observation in that area. Yeah. To keep people safe. The technology allows for that. We want to make sure that we don't have our students, in areas where they're at risk, and we can't see, what's going on to try and respond. We started adding quite a bit to areas like, all the main quads and the pathways and stuff like that, where the bulk of our populace, lives and works and walks. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was also, you sort of started covering it a bit, but I was going to ask next, what was your role in the response to the COVID pandemic, would you say?
In a word, I was in fact the COVID czar. After about, I think it was about 8 months or so, the system came along and told all the universities, all the system schools, they had to appoint a czar as basically sort of the lead contact for all things COVID response. Yeah. And we were doing that anyways. We were the people that so for instance, a lot of people think that COVID started around March of 2020. It actually started, at least from this university's concern, on 24th January, because that's when we got a call from the system office asking what we were doing about it. We stood up the operations center then in response to the pandemic, the beginning of it, the sort of tracking and trying to be prepared for it. Yeah. So when the time came where we closed everything, sent everybody home, went online, we were months, or at least weeks ahead of a lot of people in the planning process when it came to that. And then it was a function of managing oversight of all the things that grew. My operations center, which I can take you down and show you before we're done, it runs with I've got five people in emergency management that run the ops center and do everything that is emergency management. That's designed for things like a hurricane, like a snowstorm, right? Yeah. You stand up and you run pretty intense operations for 3 or 4 days, and then everything's over and we're sort of back to normal. It isn't really designed to run for 3 solid years for a glable pandemic, 7 days a week. So we expanded the operations center during that period to almost 18 people working in there. Yeah. Things like the COVID registry, which was a system we built to run all the tracking that was out there that was required, right? Who was vaccinated, who was tested, where we had outbreaks like in the different res halls and things like that. There's a million different sort of components on a daily basis that had to be tracked and observed and responded to, and we built all sorts of systems for doing that.
Yeah. So the next, I guess 3 are less like sort of, I don't want to say naturally occurring, but less like disasters and more like controversies. So, in I think 2021, a Sikh student was detained by university police for wearing a kirpan, and I remember seeing a little Niner alert saying that steps were being taken. But what would you say, like, were you involved in that response at all, like to the sort of controversy, or what? I guess what I'm trying to say is, what do you think, like, your response to that was?
Well, I mean, our specific response was there was a person identified carrying a weapon openly in the Union, is reported through Live Safe reports by other students, and we approached him. We sent law enforcement response. We approached him. We asked him to surrender the knife. He did not, and we took him into custody. And that was, all within the realm of what is normal, what we're supposed to do. To be very clear, the North Carolina state law prohibits the possession of any weapon, and certainly the use and wear of any weapon on educational property. It's a felony. Now, after that, it was determined that this was a religious article that he carried. And we then petitioned the system and the state to provide some level of guidance and some policy to provide for that, right? Because if we're going to say there's a religious exception for this sort of thing, then we needed to get that, which we eventually received, and then we've altered our processes specifically for a kirpan. There's not another religious exception for a weapon that I'm aware of.
Yeah, not that I know of. So, this one, I mean, I believe it's already been covered like very extensively by the Niner Times, but what was, I guess, your response to the controversy in February surrounding the sort of purported false alarm shooting? Do you remember? Yeah.
So, I guess I only need to refine that a little bit. What specifically you're asking about it?
Yeah. So I guess what would you say was like? Were you involved in any sort of response to the event, or was it more so that there was just this miscommunication and you didn't really necessarily have anything to do with that, or?
No, I was absolutely involved. Anytime there's a report of a weapon on campus.
Well, yeah, I guess I suppose so. Yeah,
that comes to me pretty quick. So, are you looking for my assessment of the actions on that day, or?
I guess, not necessarily an assessment of the actions, because I think, again, that's been covered a bit, but I guess.
Well, in the Niner Times, right?
Well, yeah, it's been.
So the Niner Times reported on it. right?
Yeah.
Do you know who they interviewed about the responding people about it?
I believe Chief Baker.
Yeah, they got, and they actually didn't interview him. They got some questions from an open comment
Yeah.
that he made at the student government. But like all the comments about lockdown kits and responses and stuff like that, they didn't actually come over here and talk to me. They didn't talk to our emergency management section or anything like that. So yeah, you know, that if you're going to report stuff and make comments about the way things should happen, it's best to get some sort of background on the way they should happen, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was the best reporting, but the bottom line is where we found ourselves was this: we got a report of an active shooter or of gunfire.
Yeah.
In and around a building. We immediately sent law enforcement to respond. It got sent through 911, which also then triggers our police department, but also it brought in CMPD before we could actually assess the scenario.
Okay.
Anytime we get, and this isn't like the first time this happens, right? We get calls like this.
Yeah.
We think we saw somebody with a gun. We think we heard a gunshot. There's somebody in a building with a weapon, things like that. Our immediate response is to verify the threat before we send out run, hide, fight, a lockdown, all the responses we take to an active shooter.
Yeah.
Like on April 30th, what we did. April 30th, got the calls. We sent law enforcement to respond. We had the individual in custody within 4 minutes. We had the entire campus locked down within 5 plus 9 alerts sent. If you look at any other mass shootings, we got tremendous recognition for that, and frankly, we're still asked to come talk places today about what we did to prepare and the systems we used, because we definitely set the standard for how you do respond to that.
Yeah.
In this instance, on February 1st, there were no additional reports other than this one 911 call that came from off campus from somebody's girlfriend, right? So, I mean, right away, it's not even from a direct reporting party, so you have to start to question, okay, well, what is it we know? What are we responding to? There were no live safe. There were no other reports from anywhere in the immediate area. There was zero except for this one thing. So we had no additional corroborating evidence. When we arrived on the scene where the supposed weapon and shooting was taking place, everybody was sitting around reading books, studying, acting like it was a regular day at campus.
Yeah.
So again, no additional information, right? It's like if you're the fire department and you're coming onto the scene for a fire and you come running in and there's no smoke, you're not really sure if there's a problem. And everybody's sitting around casually and you start asking, has anybody seen this? Has this gone on? So then what happens is you're at a point where that's normally the decision point, right? You get on the ground and you corroborate the initial claims. At that point, which is what we did in April 30th, again, it took us about 4 minutes. We take action, lockdown, run, hide, fight, send response, additional alert, and then start communicating and responding. We didn't have any of that. So we weren't going to do that. There was no evidence that there was any threat to the campus. The problem then is you have to do a really, really thorough search to make sure, right? And that takes a little while. It took us about 15 minutes. So at about 19 minutes, we sent out the first message that said, okay, there's some police activity in this area, there's no threat, everybody just stand by and if you see it. So what we learned after that was people got really nervous by seeing police response.
Yeah.
And not being told something. You're met with 2 risks here. If I start telling you stuff before there's actually an emergency, and I have evidence of an emergency, I'm going to unnecessarily panic a lot of people. And from that, it could result in worse injury, trauma, just from people that start to respond in a panic mode, right?
Yeah.
So you really want to be careful about doing that. But what we decided and what the chancellor gave us guidance to do was develop a message that we call the preparatory message, something we had never done before. We now have in our tool bag. That if we're in a situation like that where there's going to be a large visual response, which in and of itself may invoke some uncertainty with people, that we have a message that says something along the lines of police are responding to, and whatever it is, gunfire, report of weapon, something like that in this area. If you're in the area and safe, stay where you are. If you're not, avoid the area. So it gives people a little bit of an action directive, because we never want to tell you anything that's emergency information without an action directive, because then it's worse, right? It's like somebody yelling fire and that's it. Well, then what you want is fire, everybody leave, go this way, go down those stairs. You want to be able to tell people what to do, not just scare them. Mm-hmm. So we've developed that, and now we have that. Haven't had to use it yet. I'm still a little leery of using it because it's still a fairly ambiguous sort of thing, but I can only tell people what I know, right?
Yeah.
There's some expectation I've read reports and seen people say things that, like, we should know this instantly and we should know right away, and the world's just not like that. There's a level of human action that has to take place regardless of technology before you can actually start to know things. Again, we train very intensively for this. We have a very robust notification and response system. We have highly trained professionals and good equipment and good assets to be able to manage it. And we've proven that, 5 years ago. And what part of this was, right, I told you after that, we looked at what worked and what could be improved. Mm-hmm. After February 1st, we did the same thing. AR, what worked, what can be improved. We're never resting on our laurels. We're always looking for what else could we make better to better improve the response.
Yeah.
Hence the lockdown conversion, which will give even more opportunity for faster security of the university.
Mm-hmm. So last sort of event I want to ask your role in, this can be brief, I don't know, but I know this is like also a different department, but what would you say was the safety and security department's role in the response to the, I believe it was 2-week protest encampment that happened like just last month of school?
What would I say was our response to it?
We
were absolutely involved. It's not something, it would not be in our area. It absolutely is. So anytime there's a protest, the first level of interaction is what is called the DART team. You've probably read about that.
That's what I was thinking of.
On DART, right? So DART team was and currently is a student affairs run organization. Because largely your events like that are student organized or student run. So having student affairs people be the first level of interaction is sort of a industry best practice. That's what you see most campuses doing. But anything that's a disruption on campus, we track from the operations center. We activate what's called the IMT, the Incident Management Team, which is for any, again, I'd go back to flood, hurricane, fire, pandemic, whatever. The Incident Management Team is a organization built from every major stakeholder on the university has representation in the Incident Management Team. So it's sort of an ad hoc incident management organization. And what we do with that is we synchronize the university's response through the Incident Management Team and through the cabinet to any, existential or exigent type threat. So as the protests were going on, we monitor it. We coordinate with DART to make sure that they know where things are going on and that they're interacting with and engaging with the students. There were multiple occasions of both policy offenses and actual legal offenses that took place during the protests that we then respond to at a different level. But that's very much our lane to be a part of managing.
Mm-hmm. So it's obviously featured pretty prominently in your biographies and stuff. But what do you think specifically about your military service informs your approach to these sorts of situations?
Everything.
Mm-hmm.
So let me explain to you a little bit about this. So as a leader in the military, you're taught basic leadership and basic organization from like a platoon leader all the way through. I eventually, retired as a colonel and a brigade commander. Every bit of your life and your career, you are trained and developed about in a myriad of leadership skills and capabilities, and continually growing larger components of that, larger scope of leadership and management. And then you take that organizational management leadership type training and you put it in very chaotic and unknown circumstances, as in the Army deploying to combat. Anywhere we go, there's no playbook, right? It's not like when there's a water main break here, the public works guys jump right into, they know exactly what to do. They need this equipment, they need these people, they start shutting off these lines, they bring this out, they identify, they seal, they close. There's a playbook for that. That's not the way it works in the military. Everywhere you go, it's going to be something different. You're going to have to figure stuff out. And so it's constantly responding to sort of the unknown and developing a very broad problem-solving capability to look at problems from all sorts of different angles, consider lots of things, work in large collaborative teams. So the way we run the incident management team, for example, is a direct blueprint of how ICS works, Incident Command System. The Incident Command System is the system developed by FEMA. FEMA is Federal Emergency Management Agency. Okay, I'm not trying to insult you.
No, you're right.
But so FEMA is the federal body that governs emergency management and emergency response in the United States from a civilian level, right? They develop these structures and these programs and procedures that everybody learns, and that's where we develop things like the Operations Center and the Incident Management Team and all that sort of stuff. FEMA took their plans and their designs from the military. They went to the Joint Staff and they said, how do you guys manage large chaotic situations? And they talked about logistics, organization, operations, communications, personnel, all that sort of stuff. That's what I was doing my whole career, and through different elevated and complex levels. So that was that is a major component of what we do in safety security, right? The other big piece is our law enforcement. I was a military police officer for 26 years, so I think that sums up the law enforcement piece.
Yeah.
But I had a very unique law enforcement experience. I mean, I ran exceptionally large and lots of different complex policing, not just standard. And I don't mean to suggest that it's easy, but there is standard community policing, which is how civilian police work. We did lots of that. We did it on our installations and in some cases in other parts of the country where we were helping. But we did a lot of training and joint policing with other nations, both friendly allies and places where we would deploy to help support the Iraqi police, the Afghan police, for instance, as we were trying to help them stand up their democratic policing organizations. And then the other big piece of what I do is safety, okay? Again, the Army has a massive safety structure that is trained, and it runs in parallel with our leadership training. So, at different points in time, I was physically responsible for unit safety programs. I also spent a fair amount of time in aviation, which is a pretty safety heavy culture. But a large part of what we do from a safety standpoint is about regulatory compliance. So again, I was responsible for lots of different parts of regulatory compliance in the military, up to and including the joint staff level. So pretty much everything I did was a very neat fit for what what I did here and what we do in safety and security.
Yeah, and you mentioned military police work in Iraq. On your Wikipedia page, because I checked beforehand, it mentioned something about detainment centers in Iraq. Was that like what that was, or like was that?
So a couple things. So there's nothing on my Wikipedia page that's accurate other than my picture and my name.
Okay.
It's got generally the locations correct.
Okay.
But it is. I mean, it's something built. I've never had a hand in it. I've tried to have it corrected, but there's something about Wikipedia that doesn't allow me to do that, even though the page is about me.
Yeah.
But what you find is a lot of connection to a lot of articles where people wrote articles about me without ever talking to me or talking to people with me, or just like the Niner Times article that came out when I was first here, and they called me a war criminal, and they wrote this whole giant opinion piece on me, and not one person from the Niner Times ever came and talked to me. They put me on the front page of their paper, wrote an article about me, and didn't actually ask me a question. You're the first person that's even has an opinion about some of these controversies that's ever come to talk to me about it. Iraq. I, in fact, was part of running what we call EPW holding area, enemy prisoner of war holding area, and that's a prisoner of war camp, if you will. So it's a very austere one, because the one I did was at what is at the core level. So that's hard to explain. People don't understand the military structure, but it's a large, very large, or the largest operational field army structure. So all the units that are actively engaged in combat. I ran the facility, and I didn't run it. I mean, I was part of running it. That my boss was actually the one that was in charge of it.
Yeah.
Operations officer. But we collected and processed all the captured enemy prisoners that came in, and then evacuated them to the theater, the more permanent, prisoner of war camp, where they stayed for their time until release.
It also mentioned Somalia. Was that just the same thing?
Somalia was all just point of capture sort of stuff. So in Somalia, I was much more junior. I was a platoon leader. So there, again, as a military police, one of our missions is enemy prisoner of war, handling, detention, all that sort of stuff. So when we're moving with a tactical unit like we were in Somalia, and somebody captures somebody, they get immediately passed off to us. We hold them, we process them, which is a very simple process of documenting who they are, identifying them, recording any property that's on them, making sure that they're safe and that we're safe, and then moving them on to the next level of detention and processing. So it was very, at the point of capture, sort of the first step, what I did there.
Yeah, so we can definitely come back to that in a bit, but I have 3 quick questions. Just out of curiosity, how did you come to be selected by the search committee for this position? Was it something you applied for, or were you selected or sought out by them?
No, I applied like anybody else.
Okay.
I interviewed. There were multiple finalists, and I got selected. If you want to know why they selected me, you'll have to ask those people.
Yeah, I figured. Speaking of which, were you at all acquainted with Gary Stinnett before coming to UNC Charlotte? He was the...
No.
Yeah.
I've never met him until the day I walked into this place.
Yeah, I figured that might be the case.
Now, Gary's also a retired Army colonel.
Yeah, that's why I figured there might be a connection.
There's always that chance. You'd be surprised how often people that have served actually do know each other. Now, as I recall, we bounced a few names off of each other and found a few common friends, but no, I never met him during my career.
Yeah, and so the question after this, it'll make more sense. But for right now, this question, I also looked you up on LinkedIn, and the first result was I'm assuming a former colleague of yours from Fort Bragg. Maybe you didn't know him. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Arturo Horton made a post saying you switched him on to the job for safety and security at CPCC, which is obviously super close to your position.
Yeah, it is my. Oh, I mean, he has my counterpart position at CPCC.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So was it like you knew him previously before and you recommended him?
I've known Art since he was a young captain, I think, company commander or something like that.
Okay,
We know each other about 20-some years.
Yeah. So was it more like a recommendation, or did you tell him like this would be a good job, like fit for you, or?
So I knew the job position was opened, and I happened to be, and he lives in the North Carolina area, recently retired, and I sent him the post and said, hey, you should check into this. It looks good. If you want questions about what it's like, I'd be glad to help him out, which we talked a little bit about kind of what I do on a daily basis to sort of help him. But Art's a fabulous officer, so he didn't have any problem.
Yeah. So what was the process of retiring from the military like? Where is it something where you get like a long grace period to get a civilian job, and are you aided in that process, or is it more of like a cut and run sort of thing?
There's certainly no long grace period. I will say that since I got out and now, they actually have developed a transition program that looks a lot like, it's actually called, I can't remember the name now, but it allows you to apply for I think it's a 6-month internship with a corporate organization. And if you're accepted for it, the military basically allows you to go do that for 6 months before you retire as a way to help you get some level of exposure and experience in the civilian world, which is a bit of a challenge for those of us who get to a very senior point in our career. And when you get in at higher levels, there's a level of there's a level of networking that's required. I have a very strong resume, and I can translate that and I did translate that very well to civilian sort of organizations. But the challenge at getting hired in more senior positions is the level of internal, not informal sort of recommendations that take place. If someone's looking somewhere, it's pretty easy for a handful of peers of that same type community to say, oh, I know Austin, he's a great guy who worked for me and did these sort of things. So when you're coming from a very different community, you sort of lack that. So having a chance to do a little internship is a really nice advantage that the military started to provide. Didn't have that one. They do have a process. They call it, it's part of the Soldier for Life program, but it's called a TAPS, Transition Assistance Program, TAP, and I'm sure it's something with an S, Program and Services or something. That's generally geared toward your large volume first enlistment, because the largest turnover we have in the military are 22, 3, 4-year-old people, because that's the largest volume in the Army. And they come in and they do one enlistment, 3, 4, 5 years, and then they get out. So that's where the lion's share is, that's where the major lift is, and that's what the transition assistance program is kind of geared towards. Yeah. So I took it because it's part of what you take, and there's some useful stuff in it, and then there's some retirement sort of planning things they provide for you, but it's not extensive. It's pretty much, I finished on the 21st of August, and I was out of the Army that day,
Yeah. So, speaking more to your time in the military, from your resume, it looks, would you consider like your sort of career in the military to be a series of promotions, or otherwise, how would you describe where you were stationed and why? Because from your LinkedIn, it says at one point you were Director of Nuclear Security Operations, and then at one point you engineered the anti-terrorism program for the DoD installations. So would you say like these were all sort of promotions up until your retirement, or was it?
Well, so it's like this. The way the military works is you get assigned to somewhere, put into a job position, right? you work that for a certain period of time until the military decides that you have the potential to take on greater responsibility, and they assign you to another job. So it's not like the civilian world where you work somewhere and decide, I think I'm ready, and you go apply for another job.
Yeah.
So the military looks at you and says, you're done here, you're getting moved here to do X, and that's your next job. I mean, and it just continues to move on like that. You get your everywhere you go, just like in most places in the civilian world, you get an annual performance review. In our case, it's called an OER, an Officer Evaluation Report. And then those reviews get put together in a packet that gets looked at by the selection board at the Department of the Army, and they make decisions then on actual promotions in rank. That's how you move from lieutenant to captain to major. So those same boards then select people for major command, battalion, brigade, division commands, things like that, which are very special, unique sort of things in the military to be able to, you have to be selected, and it's a very rigorous process to be vetted and evaluated in order to command something.
All right. And, so would you say that, like, your, how would I say this, tenure at Guantanamo Bay, was that something that you were sort of assigned to?
Not sort of assigned, I was assigned.
Well, yeah, I mean, so what was your, like, I'm trying to think how to, I guess, in the sense that you were assigned to Guantanamo Bay, do you feel, like, in your view, that you have ever been, like, unfairly maligned for how you ran Guantanamo Bay, or...
Well, there's nothing that's really fair in the world, Austin.
Yeah.
What I would say is there's been a lot of comments around this institution in papers like that and articles printed and stuff that rely on not actually drawing any factual basis. At least, again, if you were writing a report about, I don't know, pick a professor on this campus.
Yeah.
And you were going to make him the subject of your report. Doing background research about him would be a component of that. But don't you think talking to him and actually getting his perspective on things would be useful?
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly would think that if professors taught you to do otherwise, that they would be sort of missing something in their educational style. But uninformed articles and uninformed statements. There's been a lot of that. You can look out there and find articles written about me. Finding the ones that I directly participated in, where somebody interviewed me and maybe I provided some information. There's one, and it's 60 minutes. So if you haven't watched that, watch that. At least that's a fair article. Excuse me. That was in my time in command. And then around here, there's been one from the Charlotte Observer several years ago when I want to say Theon was his name, but either way, a reporter from the Charlotte Observer came and did a very long interview where we sat down and talked about all kinds of things, asked me a lot of questions. I provided him background, and he wrote an article. He wrote a very balanced article. He wrote an article that had a lot more factual accuracies, and it wasn't perfect because he added things that he thought were valuable, but it was certainly the closest thing to a accurate, and at least a balanced article. And again, I don't like the word fair because nothing's fair.
Yeah. So on that note, I guess I don't know how much you can speak to your opinion on things that happened there, and so feel free to just say you can't comment. But for example, some of the articles about Guantanamo Bay from Amnesty International, for example, have claimed that significant cash bounties were offered for suspicious persons in Afghanistan and Pakistan, resulting in roughly 86% of detainees not being personally captured by U.S. military forces, allegedly. Is that true, for one? And two, do you feel that there's a possibility in your mind that any innocent people were detained at Guantanamo Bay.
Well, I have no knowledge of any of that. Can't corroborate any of that. And I won't speculate. I'll tell you what I know, and that's pretty much it.
Okay. Do you wish that during your time at Guantanamo you could have done anything differently, or did you find yourself morally opposed to anything that happened there, or did you feel that what you did was necessary, I guess?
Okay, so I was not morally opposed to anything that we did within the confines of our military mission. Our mission was the detention of enemy combatants. We're trained to do that. We do it well. We run it in accordance with the Geneva Convention. Everyone there was treated within Article 3 of the Geneva Convention, just like anywhere it should be. That's pretty much it. There wasn't anything. There's a lot of sensationalist stuff written out there in the press. There's a lot of articles written in the press, again, for people that in some cases never even went to Guantanamo, and they wrote stories about it. So they're opinion pieces, and that's fine. But the fact of the matter is, it's what I see in a lot of articles are comments like people were unlawfully detained and never given a trial or never convicted and things like that, right? You'll see those type of things written in articles. These are enemy combatants. Okay, so already someone's writing that article with a lack of knowledge. You don't charge enemy combatants, you hold them, period. That's why the Geneva Convention was created, to make rules for fairly and justly regulating what you're supposed to do in detention of enemy combatants. And there's no charge, there's no trial, because it's not a lawful thing. It is a warfare thing. It's governed by the laws of war, and there are laws there. But what I mean is, they haven't been arrested and sentenced to a prison sentence the way a felon or a criminal is. These are combatants, and that they're treated in a different way, in a different fashion, and there is no expectation of a charge or a conviction or a day in court, because that's not what it is, right?
Yeah. So bouncing back a little bit, during the sort of initial controversial response to your hiring, I guess, from the Niner Times and other student organizations, some students reported that they sort of felt as though their what's the word I'm looking for? Like their sort of funding was being sort of threatened by the chancellor. And so I'd like to ask, were you at any point considering legal action or seeking legal counsel, or I guess I'm trying to say, are these claims verifiable or corroborated, I guess?
I'm not sure what the question is there. Whether or not, I heard you ask, did I ever seek legal counsel?
Well, yeah, that's one question, and I guess the other one was, were you aware of if any students were, because I remember Chancellor Philip Dubois most that some of the statements could be viewed as potentially defamatory. Was there any?
Not some, most of them.
Yeah.
they called me a war criminal. So that's a statement of fact, right? And they put it on the cover of a paper. And they have no corroborating fact. I have never been sentenced, accused, charged, or convicted of any war crimes. Yeah. So then calling me a war criminal is in fact defamatory. It's slander. And when you print it in a paper, I mean, that's the height of defamatory and slanderous, and it's also a mark of pretty poor journalism to write things that have no factual basis. So now, as far as anything Phil said about that, Chancellor Dubois, Again, you have to interview Phil about that.
Yeah. Missed my boat on that one, but...
he's not dead. He just doesn't work here.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't know how to get in contact. Maybe I could try an email,
You
but...
found me on Google.
Fair enough.
You find Phil on Google.
But yeah, so like, were you at any point like seeking legal counsel, considering it, or I guess no? Okay.
No.
And let's see here. I think I'll do two more questions. I'll end on the more positive one, I guess. So first question is, do you feel like this reputation as like being labeled a torturer and war criminal, do you feel like that reputation will follow you for your service in the military, or no?
No. And so the only place that's a reputation is on this weird thing called Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody, and I'm telling you, anybody that's ever served with me and knows me, and I will gladly provide references if you really need that, but I don't think you need that. But the reality is, anybody that's worked with me, knows me, that served with me, that was part of any of that, can tell you what about that is accurate or factual. I have a strong reputation in the military, always have had, don't believe that's going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Fades a little bit every day, because the longer you're away from the green machine, the more it chugs along without you.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I'm not concerned about that at all, and frankly, it's a relatively vocal minority here.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's one of the things that higher education is about creative thought and deciding what your beliefs are in the world, and sort of investigating that and kind of figuring out what you stand for. And you're at a point in your life, you're a little older, but still,
Mm-hmm.
that's what you're supposed to be doing in college.
Yeah.
And the responsibility of the educational system is to teach you about how you go about learning that and studying that. Not what to think, but how to learn and how to educate yourself on that, and systems and techniques for doing that. Stuff you learned when you were in your undergraduate. But one of the key components of that is making sure that you seek out all the information and all the evidence, and that you invite a open debate if there's a topic of debate or controversy, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a small minority of people on this through my time here that have wanted to say things about me and wanted me fired, and printed a little clever little
yeah, I can see it's on your wall
like
there.
that. And the only thing I'm left with is, I feel like those students have been cheated on their education. Somewhere along the line has done them a disservice, because any one of the faculty involved with this should have said, have you guys actually talked to Bogden? Has anybody interviewed him? Has anybody asked him to come speak at a debate, a topic, something? So you're it, Austin. You're going to have to carry the torch.
Ooh, eyelid. So I suppose last question would be, you sort of answered this by saying that they were enemy combatants, but in that sense, do you feel that the decisions you made as a commander at Guantanamo Bay were all in the best interest of the country?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, yeah, pretty straightforward question. All right, well, that's really all Oh, wait, actually, I did forget one question, if you want to answer it real quick. I know it's sort of coming up on time, but
I'm not in a rush.
yeah, so in what ways would you say you personally influenced the way in which like anti-terrorism is handled in the United States? Because I remember you said you engineered the sort of design of that for DoD installations. What would you say your impact was?
No, I didn't say that. I heard you say that. I'm sure somewhere in Wikipedia it said something like that. But so I was responsible for force protection for United States Northern Command, which is the command that is responsible for the homeland defense of the country. So what that means is there's a program, there's a federal DoD, Department of Defense Force Protection program that I was the sort of chief implementing officer of. And it was responsible for all the force protection actions that we do. The large things that we did under force protection are about constantly assessing and evaluating the threat to our organizations and to our installations, notifying them of that threat, kind of like we do here on campus, right? We observe, if something happens, we notify, then we take action to respond to that threat. That's exactly what the force protection program in the military was about. And at one point I was responsible for, the oversight of the implementation of that for North America. But that I didn't design it. I just sort of ran a bit of it. Now, over the years, my field of operations and study was in safety, security, and counterterrorism, things like that. That I actually had times to help write or design policies and programs, or at least parts of. I never authored one whole thing that was mine. But that's what we, at times in staff positions and leadership positions where I did get to contribute to that, but by no means did I engineer.
I figure it's more of a collaborative process among many.
Well, certainly it takes a long time, but there are people who were much more the primary authors of those policies and programs than I was. I had times where some of those guys actually worked for me, and I had some responsibility for what they were producing, but I certainly wasn't. I was just the operator of such systems.
Okay, and I guess the last question, a bit vague, but do you think very vague question, but do you think the war on terror is still ongoing? Would you say, and would you consider your duties as a part of the war on terror?
What did I consider them?
Or
so,
would you
Let's
consider?
try to put that in two parts. The war on terror is absolutely still ongoing.
Okay.
Whether or not it's officially, there's some distinctions, right? The Department of Defense labelizes the global war on terrorism, what you may have seen abbreviated as GWAT, as a campaign. And it has a finite beginning and ending because the global war on terrorism campaign is over. Campaign is a military term for a specific focus and effort of a unit of a service, in this case, the entire Department of Defense. Are we still globally fighting terrorist organizations? Absolutely. I don't think that will ever stop. It ebbs and it flows. There was a time when ISIS was a massive organization, and it had a lot more emphasis than after they were defeated and broken up. But there's still pieces of them out there, and they still do things, and we are still working to counter and or respond to that. So that's kind of always ongoing. Now, what was my piece of that? Is that what you asked? My question was, would you consider your duties throughout your military career as a part of that campaign? Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, that's all the questions I could think of. We went a bit over time, but